all of these crises are connected. Tomorrow we're going to be talking about Trump's indictment for the extremely piddling charge of, sending hush money to a porn star, one of the rare women who slept with him voluntarily, or so he claims, when he's committed a multitude of atrocities and crimes to which he's freely confessed, obstruction of justice, fomenting a coup, sedition, treason, abuse of the pardon power, serious offenses. Then, of course, Kremlin interference in the 2016 election and, plausible Kremlin interference in the 2020 election. And why was that interference done? It was so the war on Ukraine by the Kremlin would be more easily accomplished. And so the barriers to that war, like NATO and the EU and a democratic United States, would be eliminated. This was not some random plan. This was a strategy. It was a strategy that was designed by people like Paul Manafort, who had worked with Kremlin-leaning political groups in Ukraine to rearrange its internal politics, and then simply dragged the US, the UK, other countries into this situation. And that's one of the core grains of this crisis. And it often gets overlooked because so much time has passed and he's committed so many other atrocities that the initial shock of a Kremlin asset inhabiting the White House, dictating foreign policy, prostrating himself to Putin in Helsinki, not being shy about any of his objectives, outright saying, as he has said since the late 1980s, that, NATO shouldn't exist, that Russia should have more power. And then, once again, as he's campaigning, as seditionists who attempt to overthrow the government always do in a healthy democracy, as he's campaigning, he's, saying that he supports Russia in Russia's war on Ukraine.
You have that massive cafe explosion killing one of the stars of Prigozhin's big movement on Sunday, which is a sign that there's likely going to be more to come. All of this is reminiscent, of course, of what happened last August to Dugin's daughter, Alexander Dugin, being the Steve Bannon of the Russian fascist movement, with his influence tentacles reaching around the world, much like Bannon's own daughter, who is a little fascist mini-me like her dad, modeled on her father. She was killed in a car bomb outside of Moscow that looks like it was also intended for him. Ukraine was blamed right away by the Russian authorities. Russian radicals and pulled up in Kiev took credit for it. It just goes to show that the instability in Russia is growing. The cracks among the elite is growing. And on top of that, Wagner employed this strategy, as the Russian terrorists often do, of releasing prisoners out of Russia. They would get their freedom in return for fighting in Ukraine, those that survived, because most of them were used as cannon fodder. And there were reports that these Russian prisoners being sent to the front lines were drugged up. And Ukrainian soldiers witnessed this, seeing these Russian soldiers just running over fields of corpses, trenches of corpses into guaranteed death, into hails of bullets, hails of missiles, and so on, almost like they were possessed by something, like they were drugged up. The Nazis, of course, famously drugged their soldiers in World War II. So it looks like Wagner's been drugging their soldiers to produce cannon fodder, to feed the meat grinder in Ukraine. Russia has been depending on this very Nazi-esque strategy of trying to overwhelm your enemy with wave and wave and wave of bodies. And so what I'm saying is that from those that survived out of that cesspool of that horror, that have returned to Russia or who have left the front line, escaped and returned back to Russia, there's been a spike in crime. Murders are on the rise for the first time in a very long time. Russian Russian people across the country are feeling very uneasy about this, the growing instability, and obviously given the rampant corruption, the sinking quality of life. Even before the total war, the average Ukrainian lived much better than the average Russian. So the big boiling pot of Russia is just going to continue to heat up because you have criminals, abject criminals at the helm, and now they're all fighting each other.